Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at First Chronicles chapters 1 through 9, where we see a lot of genealogies. Chapter 1, verse 1 starts off with just a listing of names. Notice going all the way back to Genesis: Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, and then the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, notice that the beginning here, first, although it takes you back to Genesis, it's actually very similar, I think, to the book of Matthew, which also starts with a genealogy, just a list of names. And I would suggest that it's doing it for the same reason, because it's setting forth a foundation to show the genealogy of the king. You say, well, the king is David, isn't he? Well, yes, that's true, but to show you a genealogy of the greater king, King Jesus. And of course, Chronicles isn't going to mention that because Jesus hasn't been born yet. But I think Chronicles is giving the foundation to show you the genealogy of the promised king, even though he hasn't come yet at that point. By the time we get to Matthew, he has come. And so we have a set of the sons of Noah. First of all, the first son of Noah that's mentioned here is Japheth. From Japheth, we're going to get Japheth, Ham, and Shem. And notice they're more or less going to be set up in these locations, although there's going to be a little bit of overlap. Japheth to the north, Shem in the Middle East, Ham, for the most part, will be in Africa, although with Canaan, we're going to see a change from that. So, verse 5, the sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Yavin, Tubal, Meshech, and Tyrus. Here are where those sons ended up. At least their descendants did. I don't know if the sons themselves went there, but their descendants. Gomer, the Scythians to the north of the Black Sea. Magog, also the Scythians. In fact, Josephus tells us that Magog were made up of the Scythians, but probably a little bit of both. Madai is what we refer to as the Medes. They were a Indo-European people, descendants of Japheth. And you have Yavin. In fact, Yavin becomes the sort of buzzword for Greece, but also takes in anybody else that lived in Europe, going as you move further toward the west. It sort of takes in all those people. And I'm not saying that there weren't other migrations that take place as well. Notice verse 8, the sons of Ham were Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. As we look at the sons of Ham on a map, first of all, we have Cush. That's the people group to the south of Egypt. As I go up the Nile, moving southward on the Nile River. Mitzrayim is actually the term for Egypt in the Old Testament. Indeed, if you go to Egypt today and you ask a guide, well, what country are you in? Well, he'll call it Egypt if he's speaking English, but that's not actually correct. What happened is some Greek tourists came to Egypt back in ancient times, and they had landed around a little village called Aegyptus, and they said, "What do you call this place?" And the Egyptians thought they were talking about the village they were in, and they said, "This is Aegyptus," and the Greeks thought they meant that was the name of the whole land, and the name stuck. And so we call it Egypt. They don't call it that. They call it Mitzir. Notice Mitzrayim, the im is plural. Mitzar, that's Arabic for Egypt. And Mitzrayim would be the Hebrew term for the same place. Moving to the west, you have Put, and of course Canaan. We think of the land of Canaan, where ultimately we're going to see the nation of Israel settle there. Next, in verse 17, we have the sons of Shem. They were Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, Aram, Uz, Hol, Gether, and Meshech. So here's the sons of Shem. We have Elam. The Elamites were just barely to the east of southern Mesopotamia. Asher is the term for what we're going to call Assyria later on. You have Arphaxad. It will be from this tribal group that we'll see both the Israelites and the Arabs, the Semitic peoples, the descendants of Abraham. We have Lud to the in western Anatolia, the part that we call western Turkey today. Aram will be located to the north of Canaan, and this area is today called Syria. That's a later designation. They always referred to themselves as Aram. In fact, their language is Aramaic, and that's going to be a very common language throughout the ancient world. We come now to chapter 2 and verse 1. These are the sons of Israel: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Joseph, Benjamin, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Notice this is not in the order in which they are born, although Reuben is the oldest, but Benjamin's the youngest, and notice he's not. Instead, they are grouped according to mothers. So you have the sons of Levi, of Leah, that are mentioned first. Then you have the two sons, and notice Dan and Naphtali are sons of Bilhah, who are the handmaiden of Rachel. And then you have Rachel herself, who gave birth to Joseph and Benjamin. In fact, she died giving birth to Benjamin. And finally, we have Gad and Asher, and these are the sons of Zilpah, who was the handmaiden of Leah. And remember that both wives of Jacob sort of got into the act of saying, well, yes, you're having children by me, but we can have some extras by the son of my handmaiden, and they would be legally descendants of mine as well. So, chapter 1, we go from Adam all the way to Abraham and his sons. Chapter 2, then, as we've just seen, pick up with the sons of Israel, and then move all the way down to David. And chapter 3, give the sons of David and Solomon. And so this has given us the lineage of David. Now we come to chapter 4, where we have the sons of Judah and of Simeon. Now, it's in the middle of chapter 4 that we have this passage, a prayer by somebody named Jabez. Somebody actually wrote a book called The Prayer of Jabez many, many years ago. It sold a lot of copies. It wasn't a bad prayer. We're going to actually read the prayer. Notice Jabez was more honorable than his brothers, and his mother named him Jabez, saying, because I bore him with Jabez. The word Jabez actually means pain. Now, Jabez called. How would you like to have? How would you like to have a name where you're called pain? Painful. Oh, that's just painful to hear. Well, Jabez called on the God of Israel, saying, "Oh," and here's the prayer: "Oh, that you would bless me indeed, and enlarge my border, and that your hand might be with me, and that you would keep me from harm, and that it may not Jabez me, that it may not pain me." And God granted him what he requested. Now, that's not a bad prayer. Although it strikes me that the ideas for this prayer are actually found in the first part of the Lord's Prayer. And instead of the prayer of Jabez, actually, somebody else wrote a book, almost like a rebuttal to the prayer of Jabez, called The Prayer of Jesus. And I think it's actually a much better book. Hank Hanegraaff wrote this. It walks us through not the prayer of Jabez, but the prayer of Jesus. And I think there are some commonalities about asking for God's blessing and asking for his leadership, that his kingdom might come, that his will would be done on earth as it is in heaven, and protect us from the evil one. So yes, there are certain commonalities in that prayer. I think instead of prayer, and I'm not saying you can't pray the prayer of Jabez. I think it's much better, much more well-rounded, can I say it this way, much more biblical, much more obedient, because Jesus said, pray in this way. And I think perhaps we ought to pray the prayer of Jesus, the prayer that he both prayed, but also the prayer that he taught his disciples to pray. So we have the sons of Judah and Simeon in chapter 4. In chapter 5, we have the sons of Reuben, Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh. Now, these are the 2.5 tribes that settled on the east side of the Jordan River. Remember how the Israelites got to the east side of the Jordan River. They were about to cross over. And 2.5 tribes, Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh, said, we'd rather stay here. We don't want to cross over. And Moses said, you can do that. You can give up your inheritance in the promised land, and you can stay here instead, although you're going to cross the Jordan and fight for the land, and you're going to see the land that you did not get. Those sons are mentioned here in chapter 5. Next, we have the sons of Levi. Remember, we said that Chronicles is going to have a lot of emphasis on on the Levites and on the priests. So these are the sons of Levi. They're musicians and their settlements. In chapter 7, we have the sons of Issachar, Benjamin, Naphtali, Manasseh, Ephraim, and Asher, those sons that we didn't catch earlier. Notice when we listed the sons, there's one missing. We're going to get to that in a second. The sons of Benjamin are now mentioned in greater detail. They were mentioned in chapter 7. Now, a bit more detail. Why is there more detail? Because from Benjamin is going to come a king, King Saul. Although we're not going to get into the history of Saul, we do have his genealogy. And then in chapter 9, we have a summary of Jerusalem after the exile with regard to the priestly families and the Levitical families. But I said although he was mentioned early on, there's one of these sons whose name is not mentioned in greater detail. And of course, I'm speaking of the tribe of Dan. Why is Dan left out? It's a good question. We're not specifically told. It might be because Dan gave up their land inheritance. They said, we're a little too close to the Philistines and we don't like being so close to them. And they left their inheritance and they moved far to the north, as far north as you can be, and still be in the land. You might argue, well, it might just be just outside the land, but it's right on the northern border. And there eventually, not only did they settle there, but eventually a pagan temple was set up in the location of Dan in the north, and it became a place of paganism. Now, there were other places of paganism too, so I don't know if that's particularly why, if it's because they gave up their land inheritance, or maybe some other reason. But no mention is made here of the tribe of Dan.